Okay. We are recording. All right, so I just want to do a fairly short video today, although there is some nice art involved in this that we want to look at. We're moving on now from the ancient Greeks, and we're moving further to the west to the Italian peninsula, where there is a fairly strong Greek presence. By the way, these people are very familiar with each other. And we're going to look now at the early formation of Rome, of ancient Rome. Of course, the next big topic in Western Civ is the Roman Empire. And we have another 4 weeks or so, and we will do that, looking at Roman things. So a couple basic things. You're doing things, again, by millennium, by the millennium. We've got the Greeks have their sort of peak of their culture around that 6th, 5th, 4th century, and that 400s there, the time of Pericles, the time we've been looking at when the Acropolis was built and when all that wonderful drama was performed. So that right in the middle of the century is really the time of the ancient Greeks, of the peak of the Greek civilization. It doesn't disappear after that. Of course, it's very much around for hundreds and hundreds of years after that, but that's the point. That's the part that we looked at. Then around that time, around the middle of the first millennium, you start to see the development of this other political culture to the west, on the west side of the Italian peninsula, which is Rome. And they have their own language, the Latinate language becomes Latin soon. And so where they are, I mean, I'll go to the slides quickly, but where they are in Rome is at this, where the Tiber River is. There's a large culture, very interesting and important one that we're going to look at today, called the Etruscans, the Etruscan culture to the north. And you have this trading place where you have a ford across the river. And there are a couple different tribes there. And it's a rough place. It's a rough and sort of Wild West kind of place. And there's some wild stories that we're going to go over here in a couple of minutes. And then it all kind of comes together and forms Rome. So the character, the personality of Rome and of Athens, of the city of Athens and the city of Rome, are very, very different. In some ways, people will often say it's like the sort of stereotypical difference between the English and the Americans, right? The Greeks are very sort of civilized and refined, and the Romans are much more kind of crude, but they're also much, much bigger. They like things much bigger. And the Romans have a global empire like Alexander had. The Greeks never really have an international empire. The Athenian Empire, so-called, is an empire of Greeks over Greeks. Anyway, so takeaway basic. Rome, Republican Rome, there's a constitutional republic of Rome, which exists for several hundred years, the second half of the first millennium, until the rise of the Caesars. You might think that the dictatorial period of the Caesars, or the tyrannical period, would be something that would come before the period of constitutional democracy, but that's not the case with ancient Rome. In the case of ancient Rome, you have the Roman Republic for the last couple centuries of the first millennium, and then in the last century, first century BCE, the time of Christ, you get the rise of the Caesars, Julius Caesar, right? And we'll talk about that. Today, though, our topic is this first millennium Rome, the early history of Rome. Just a basic thing to know about, one of those things that's sort of a cloudy and unknown in people's minds. What is the chronological relationship between the Greeks and the Romans? And that's one of the things we're roughly trying to get it by the millennium today. All right, so what am I doing? Oh, yeah, do you know what I'm doing? Probably not. I don't even know anything. Oh, here we go. Okay, the music. There you go. And let's put up this little daily here. Let's put it up into the early Romans and the Etruscans. The Etruscans are fascinating people who are well worth the study and have left quite a lot of artifacts behind. So the founding mythology of Rome, the founding myth, and I don't know where they get, it says on this slide here, I got it. It says it was found on the April 21st, 753. I don't know, I'm not exactly sure where that comes from, to be honest with you. by these twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, and the Trojan prince Aeneas. Now, remember, you've got, you have the Homeric myths, the Homeric myth of the Trojan War. And so all across the Mediterranean basin, then for centuries after that, a great deal of collective mythology is based on this premise that you had this golden age before the fall, if you will. And so another thing here you see with the Romans, they think, well, there was a Trojan king Aeneas. Is Aeneas real or not? We do not know. So Alba Longa is a town to the south of where Rome is today. As I say, you have the Romans to the south of the Tiber, and the Sabines to the north of the Tiber, and Alba Longa, the original town where you have the Latin king. These are this tribe of the Latins. They speak that language, which becomes the Latin language, which then branches off and becomes Spanish and Portuguese and French and Italian and Romanian and the languages we know of as the Latinate languages, which have that stem changing verb conjugation pattern that you know so well. So Rhea Silvia, Rhea meaning goddess, gave birth to twins, and they are actually the children of Mars. Again, part of the founding myth of Rome, that it's a rough, warlike place, that Rome lives by its army. It conquers other areas and gets tribute from them. It is a real self-conscious empire. There's Rhea Silvia with Romulus and Remus. We have the Roman version of an old story that we have seen so many times, Moses and the bulrushes, but we saw it also with in Hesiod and Theogony, and we saw it with the prophecies about the Titans and the Olympians. We saw it in Gilgamesh. It's this prophecy. This is why Sigmund Freud picks up on it. This prophecy that the son will kill the father, kind of thing, and it's got some kind of root in seasonal changes, but it's very universal. So sure enough, he thinks Romulus and Remus will take the king, will take it back. Remember, they're the sons of the king who's been deposed. And so they were sent off to the wilderness, just like Oedipus is abandoned, exposed, they call it, in the wilderness. And in this case, a she-wolf, a mother wolf, raises them. There's another testament to their toughness, right? They're the sons of Mars, and they were raised by a she-wolf, so watch out. And it says there on that second to last bullet point there, a sanctuary for the indigent, exiled, and unwanted. Well, it was a frontier place. It was a frontier place where people came together to trade. It was in the far west of anything like the trading civilization of the Orient, a remote place, and a crossroads and a rough place, where a sort of Wild West place. So the story is that the Latin tribe invited the Sabine tribe to a festival and made off with all of their young maidens. There are a million different versions of what the story was, but the abduction of the Sabine women is a classical topic for artists. Here you see a very famous bronze wolf suckling Romulus and Remus. A basic image of Rome. And here we have a 16th century post-Renaissance marble sculpture. And there are many, many others of this genre. It's just one of those scenes that was acceptable and yet rather exciting for Renaissance artists. Long after the French Revolution, Jacques-Louis David, the neoclassical artist who sought to reinvigorate classical ideals and virtues in revolutionary France, and so he paints also his version of the abduction of the Sabine River. It looks pretty serious when he does it. And then Picasso, it's fun. Picasso goes through a period in the 60s where he does covers of famous paintings. And here's his copy of Jacques-Louis David's Abduction of the Sabine Women. So, hey. So, getting back to business then a little bit, it looks as if, very pretty old, but not ancient. It looks like it goes back to the early first millennium, 8th century, maybe back to the very turn of the millennium. And you have these Etruscans. And very early on, the time of Heraclitus, basically, these are aristocratic, and they're also the political structure of the Roman Republic also had a lot to do with religious authority. The Etruscans lost power. The Latin and the Sabine tribes merged somehow, and they have their legend about it, but in any event, they merged into this republic. And so then part of the story there notices that since it was two tribes coming together to form a city together, they had to arrive at some agreements beforehand. And so that sense of a republic as being something where different individuals are living together in agreement, not necessarily constitutional democracy. And so you have this amazing downtown Rome, and back in Republican Rome, the Roman Forum was sort of the crossroads of the world. It was sort of like what would be Times Square in New York, or I don't know, something like that, someplace where everybody passes through there. The Roman Forum, and you can still go there today. You can go and see all this stuff. The Forum Magnum, the big forum, or simply the Forum, a very famous place, and something you'll see alluded to in literature quite a lot. So, and as I say, you can go and see the ruins of the Roman Forum, and so it gets reconstructed in movies a lot. Here's what it looks like today, and as you can see, it must have been quite amazing to be walking around there about 300 years before Christ, through a huge crowd of marketers with all their stalls, and people, foreigners going by with their strange clothing and language and so on. Really a sense of the center of the world. And Rome had that sense of itself. It was sort of the omphalos. It was sort of the center of everything, the center of civilization. And they took that to heart, and they built these roads. And I mean, it sounds kind of crazy, but the fact is that they actually had this policy where they would sort of dig out the road, and they would lay down rock, and then they would lay down some other layers on top of that. And a lot of these roads, iters they called them, ITER, are still in use today because they did such a good job. And so the new roads are just over where the old Roman roads are. And literally they had the sense that, you're kind of feeding down into Rome no matter where you started. That was certainly their civic myth of Rome. And then some truth to it. Here you see a very dramatic claim that no matter where you start, you're going to end up in Rome. Again, the state religion is important, and then the various Caesars, the various emperors, will have to vie with the state religious authorities as well as authorities of the old council. So there are other centers of power. People are interested in the Vestal Virgins, another thing you hear about a lot. The thing about the Vestal Virgins nowadays, when we look at them, they had a great deal of political power. I mean, what they were these upper class women when they were very young. They were sworn into celibacy as Vestal Virgins. You can imagine all the various stories behind how somebody would decide to do that. They would be very well taken care of. But the thing is, they did have political power. You see in the last bullet point there, Theodosius, the first one of the later Christianizing emperors, Christian convert emperors, finally in 394 Common Era, right? So 400 years after the time of Christ, the College of the Vestals was finally closed, but they would be consulted and they would have something to say about various decisions that the city would make. So they had a large establishment right down there at the Forum, the College of the Vestal Virgins. Statues of them. Oh, okay. So if I got 500 BC, now that's 5th century, the 400s is the same century as Periclean Athens. 7 kings, the last of the 7 kings was deposed. These are old tribal kings, and you get an actual sort of constitutional republic, which is quite amazing. And I think over the years in Europe, one of the reasons why Rome was studied so much had a different image than we have today, because many people were interested in studying the Roman Republic. Nowadays, Rome is kind of a symbol of empire to us. You have the 2 councils. These things would be handed back and forth. The patricians, the noblemen, formed the Senate. It was an oligarchy. These were powerful people who had sort of made peace with each other, really. So let's look at some art. You'll see the Magna Graecia, Greater Greece. You'll see that influence, and then you can start to see the difference between Roman stuff and Greek things. Greater Greece, the Greek colonies in southern Italy, and also across North Africa. I mentioned the Greeks weren't big empire runners, but they were colonizers. The Greeks sent out colonies of Greeks all across the Mediterranean basin. We have mosaics, pottery, and sculpture, the marble carving that's characteristic of the Greeks, and bronze casting, which is Etruscan. But the other thing is Etruscan art will look what art historians would say is Oriental, meaning it is influenced by, say, the Persian Empire and other elements of the Middle East. And the Etruscans eventually got absorbed into the Roman Empire. They had a lot of good metal, if you're interested in that kind of thing, and so they mined it and they made a lot of good hammered metal things. They also did sculptures. All right. And you'll see as we look at some ceramics, some Roman ceramics and Etruscan ceramics, that they're just totally derivative from the Greek ceramics that we looked at before. But this kind of thing looks like a Persian thing. It's a hammered bronze chariot, a real chariot from the 6th century BC, the 500s. There's a detail of it. It might not have been an actual fighting chariot. It might have, though, but it looks like it might have been ceremonial. I don't know. Hammered bronze. And look at this piece of bronze casting, Arezzo, a Italian city from the early 4th century. So this would be sometime around the time of the execution of Socrates, when Plato was writing the Republic, around the 375, 380. And look at that piece. I mean, it's just really unbelievable. Here is another cast, a handle. They probably had a cast that they used to make many multiples of this. And here are Sleep and Death carrying off Sarpedon, very much coming from those ceramic illustrations of Homeric myths and post-Homeric myths. And here we see this piece. Etruscans known for their jewelry, worked gold jewelry. And remember, the Etruscans had mines. They had good precious metals. And so that's what they were good at working. And so here you have an ear stud. Looks so busy to be an ear stud. And here's some more jewelry made out of gold. And there are a lot of these pieces. So if you're interested in jewelry and the history of jewelry, you want to look at the Etruscans a little bit. Here we see what you would call a cartoon urn. You can take that, of course, top off. I'm not sure how the arms work. And we are shortly, one of the units we're going to have before the end will be Roman mosaic. You know, the mosaic was a great medium for Roman artists. Here's an early mosaic. You can see it's very mosaic, right? Those little tiles that are attached on there. Again, in the 300s in Rome, they were making this ceramic piece, which, again, of course, where does this come from? This comes from the Greeks. And so that was extremely popular cultural export of the Greeks, that the Etruscans and the Romans and everybody else within range of their traders not only bought a lot of the original Greek stuff, the high-end stuff, which we find in Etruscan tombs and other places, but also made their own ceramics. Very much like a Greek red figure. The Romans had this idea, maybe it was a fatalist idea, but they had this idea that you didn't, that if you were a sort of nobleman and you were having a bust made of yourself, you didn't want it to be in any way idealized. I guess somehow maybe it's just an expression of your own power or something. Maybe I don't know. Maybe it's just a good commitment to naturalism. The benefit for us is that we have a lot of Roman busts, and we can see very much what Roman people really looked like, because they had this ethos where they didn't clean it up. One of the cool things, I mean, we saw with the Mesopotamians, you've got those cylinder seals. We saw the ceramics of the Greeks. Everybody's got sort of a cool object. A really cool genre of Roman and Etruscan objects are these sarcophagi. They are like Egyptian sarcophagi, like what they have King Tut in. Well, these ones are big, huge, square ones, usually with bases that were meant to have a sort of a, excuse me, a little more like a building built around them, like a Christian saint later on. So, but they would carve these incredible bas relief sculptures on the sides of these sarcophagi. I want to show you a few of them, because if you ever get a chance to see them, you should. And as I say, we also then learn a lot about Roman life by what's depicted on these. So it's very old. You see it's worn. But that's more like it. Look at that object. And these objects from around the time of Christ and before the time of Christ. And that is carved from a single piece. The top is, the bottom is carved from a single piece of marble. Here's another one. They are often amazing in their intricacy, as that one that we just saw, and they are very fine pieces. So as I say, a thing about Romans, the Republic comes first, and then the Caesars and the Empire come after that. So you get, it's happening is that there's a lot of expansion, and the whole thing is getting to be big. Rome's always a tiger by the tail. Nobody's really ever in control of Rome. So with the assassination of Caesar in 44 BC, second half of the first century, and Octavian pronouncing himself Augustus. Okay, and so somewhere between those 2 years, again, that's the first century BC, is when historians say, okay, call this the imperial period, the rise of Julius Caesar, really a unique figure, Julius Caesar, and we'll look at that. The Republic, of course, it's a republic of oligarchs, a Senate that sits on top of the kingdom and shares power. Now, last thing I'll say, then I do think that's the last, yeah, that is. So the last thing I'll say is this, that you have the old Senate, this old council, and then you have the people, and then you have the rise of the Caesars. And so one of the elements of imperial politics in Rome, which is kind of ironic, but maybe we can recognize it in our own politics. So there's a lot of the pro-emperor people, the pro-imperial faction, who will tell you that they're against these senators, who are these old oligarchs and members of ruling families, who are keeping the people down. And so you get this idea of the demagogue, the gog, the leader, the guide, the gog, the demos, the Democrats, the demos, the demagogue, leader of the people, triangulating between the old Senate, the decadent and wealthy old Senate, House of Lords. So that's a sort of the flavor of Roman politics, is this idea that the emperors are often justifying themselves as champions of the people. So just another thing to bear in mind. Well, that's the end of that. I'll give you some. I'll give you some links. There's a couple different ways to go. As you see, the art historical ways. There's a lot of nice, attractive pieces here, and nice, attractive history. But there's also good other kinds of history as well. All right. So that's that. Early Rome and the Etruscans.